Hey listeners, Grace Anna here, host of ArtMuse. I wanted to share another art-centered podcast with you called The Art of Crime, a podcast that delves into the unlikely collisions between true crime and the arts. Host Gavin Whitehead shares extensively researched episodes with gripping stories bringing art history and true crime together in a brilliant way. Learn about the attempted assassination of Benvenuto Cellini, the various artists who have been accused of being Jack the Ripper, or Madame Tussauds and her Chamber of Horrors, among many other fascinating topics. The Art of Crime podcast is currently in its 4th season, which focuses on art-related crimes in New York City. To learn more about the Art of Crime podcast, you can visit their website at www.artofcrimepodcast.com or find them on all streaming platforms where you can listen and subscribe. What is art without the muse? Many of Western art's most famous works are depictions of women. But who were these women? Do they have their own stories to share with the world? Hello and welcome to ArtMuse, a podcast that aims to reshape the ways in which we interpret well-known works of art by paying dues to the women whose images have been immortalized, but whose names and stories have been wrongfully overlooked. While these women's faces are familiar to viewers around the world, their identities have been largely forgotten. Together we will explore the important lives and legacy of the female muse and appreciate these works of art from a new perspective, through the eyes of the women whose image stares back at us. Is the muse in actuality just as, if not more, important than the artists themselves? And I'm your host, Grace Anna. Her portrait by David is one of the most iconic paintings in the Louvre's entire collection and attracts millions of viewers each year. As she reclines on her sofa, a sofa she popularized so much that it now bears her name, she teases us with her curly hair, rosy cheeks, and inscrutable smile. Though her image has been reproduced in countless mediums across the globe, few know that she was one of the most remarkable women of the 19th century and inspired the greatest artists, writers, intellectuals, and politicians of her day, with not only her unrivaled beauty, but with the goodness of her heart. Listeners, today I introduce you to Madame Juliette Récamier, a French socialite and famed beauty affectionately dubbed the Darling of Europe. In fact, her looks were so enchanting that she drove some of the most powerful men in all of history wild with desire, including Napoleon Bonaparte, his brother Lucien, and the Prince of Prussia. Born in 1777 in Lyon, France, Juliette spent the majority of her early childhood at a convent, where she was educated by nuns. At the age of 10, she joined her parents in Paris, who had moved there a few years prior when her father was appointed as a customs collector for King Louis XVI. Noticing her exceptional beauty early on, her mother carefully groomed Juliette to become a society woman. At the age of 15, Juliette was married to a middle-aged banker who was not only old enough to be her father, but many believe might have actually been her biological father, as we know her mother had extramarital relations with him. Luckily, Juliette's marriage was not romantic by nature, and it was well known that she never consummated the marriage nor had sexual relations with her husband. Married at the peak of the Reign of Terror, her marriage was a strategic move to protect her and her family from losing not only their heads, but all of their money in the Revolution. If Juliette was married, she could inherit her husband's assets should he face the guillotine. Fortunately, both her husband and parents were not persecuted against, despite having ties to the monarchy. In fact, in the years following the revolution, her husband's wealth only grew, and Juliette enjoyed the perks of the upper class. When her husband bought them a hotel in the center of Paris, which they converted into an impressive new home, she began to host a weekly salon. It didn't take long for Juliette's salon to become one of the most popular in the city, and attracted leading literary figures, intellectuals, and politicians. Her skills as hostess, in combination with her outstanding beauty and warm personality, soon turned Juliette into a local celebrity, and her salon the center of cultural and political activity in Paris. So it comes with no surprise that her exceptional elegance and charm caught the attention of Paris's leading artists, and many of the most prestigious portraitists of her time captured her likeness across the mediums. Between the years of 1800 and 1803 alone, she was painted by Jacques-Louis David and François Gérard, and sculpted by Joseph Chenard. Her portraits were so popular that they were reproduced across Europe, only increasing her fame and desirability. And her appeal became so widespread that soon the two most powerful men in all of France turned weak at their knees in her presence. When Juliette met Lucien Bonaparte in 1799 at a dinner party, he became so enamored with her that he bombarded her with love letters for over 6 months, despite her polite refusals. And when she met Napoleon Bonaparte that December, he fawned over her at a party, even sending messengers to express his fondness towards her. Unfortunately for the Bonaparte brothers, Juliette never reciprocated their interest. And in fact, despite the countless men that threw themselves at her, Juliette never expressed real interest in any of them, at least not until her elder years. Interestingly, this may have been more than just a testament to her faithfulness to her husband. There is a wealth of information that points to the likely possibility that Juliette was in love with a woman, the celebrated author Madame de Staël. Juliette met Madame de Staël early in her marriage, and the two women remained close for the rest of Madame de Staël's life. In surviving private journal entries and letters, Juliette and Madame de Staël express words of the deepest affection, love, and care, well beyond the realms of a platonic relationship. The prospect that the most sought-after woman in all of Europe was secretly involved with another woman is nothing short of extraordinary. Her relationship with Madame de Staël was not only scandalous due to its presumed romantic nature, but their association was a leading factor in Juliette being exiled from Paris in 1811. Madame de Staël, one of Napoleon's loudest opponents, was exiled a few years earlier for her libelous publications, and Juliette's exile subsequently followed. Juliette spent most of her 3 years of exile in Italy, splitting her time between Rome and Naples, where she befriended Queen Maria Carolina. With Napoleon's defeat in 1814, Juliette returned to Paris, where she continued to host her salon. After Madame de Staël's death in 1817, Juliette became involved with the writer and politician François Chateaubriand, and had a lasting impact on both his political career and the publication of his memoir. In her later years, Juliette moved into a private suite at a local convent, where she continued to host guests despite her more humble accommodations. In May of 1849, Juliette passed away peacefully at the age of 71 after contracting cholera. It's important to note that Juliette's story cannot be removed from the tumultuous political history of her time. In her lifetime, she witnessed more changes of rulership in France than one can count. Born in the final years of the monarchy, she grew up into her adolescence at the height of the Reign of Terror, aged into adulthood as Napoleon was crowned emperor, celebrated Napoleon's defeat, and then watched in shock as Napoleon returned for a final 100-day reign, and finally, in her elder age, celebrated the crowning of King Louis XVIII. Juliette's own life twisted and turned alongside her country's, and their histories are both inseparable and intertwined. As historian H. Noel Williams proudly wrote, "There are few more interesting figures in the social life of the 19th century than that of Madame Récamier. Distinguished alike for her beauty, her virtue, her charm of manner, and her goodness of heart, she reigned for upward of 50 years as the almost undisputed queen of Parisian society. Today we aim to honor Madame Juliette Récamier as the intelligent and independent woman she was, a woman who took ownership of her beauty and used it as a means of power, who drove some of the most influential men of history wild with desire, but was in secret involved with not only another woman, but one of the leading feminists of her day. As a woman whose life is just as incredulous as her country's political history, and as a woman who inspired the greatest intellectuals, writers, and artists of her day with the goodness of her heart." So without further ado, let's dive in to the wondrous world of Madame Juliette Récamier. Jean-Françoise Julie Adélaïde Bernard was born on December 4th, 1777, in Lyon, France. From her birth, she was given the nom de caresse, or nickname Juliette, which she was referred to as for the rest of her life. Juliette was not born into nobility, but rather to middle-class origins. Her father, Jean Bernard, was a notary for the city of Lyon. Her mother, Julie Bernard, was a society woman and hosted a small salon. Though not particularly distinguished socially, both of her parents were exceptionally good-looking, especially Juliette's mother, who was known for both her beauty and ambitious personality. There is no doubt that Juliette inherited her mother's stunning looks and charming demeanor, both of which would serve her well through her life. Despite being of the middle class, Juliette would have enjoyed a more than comfortable upbringing. As the only child, she was doted upon by her parents, who were convinced from her birth that she was the most darling little girl that had ever graced the earth. Sensing early on that she was special, her parents carefully groomed Juliette from an early age into a model child. They marveled at how well-behaved, gentle, and obedient she was to their direction. In 1784, when Juliette was 7 years old, her father was offered a position as a customs collector for King Louis XVI. Some have suspected that Juliette's mother was behind her husband's big promotion, having charmed one of the king's ministers into giving him the job. However he landed the position, it was too important an opportunity for him to turn down, and Juliette's parents began to prepare their move to Paris. Juliette was subsequently sent to a local convent in Lyon to be taken under the care of nuns. Juliette's mother must have been comforted by the fact that her sister, Juliette's aunt, was a nun at this convent and would be sure to take special care of Juliette. Juliette spent the next 3 years at the convent, where she received an impressive education. She particularly enjoyed the peace and serenity it provided, and would often reflect with great affection on these happy years throughout her adulthood. But when she was 10, her parents requested that she join them in Paris, and Juliette was devastated to have to leave her life at the convent behind. As Juliette later remembered, "The night before my aunt was to fetch me, I was taken to the Lady Abbess's chamber to receive her blessing. The next day, bathed in tears, I passed over the threshold of that door which I could scarcely remember opening to admit me. I found myself in a carriage by the side of my aunt, and we started for Paris. I left with regret that tranquil and innocent period of my life to enter upon one of turmoil. The memory of it comes back to me like a vague, sweet dream, with its clouds of incense, its innumerable ceremonies, its processions in the gardens, its chants and its flowers. If I have spoken of these early years on account of the immense influence which they have exercised on my whole life, it is without doubt to these vivid impressions of faith received in childhood that I am indebted for the fact that I have retained my religious convictions in the midst of all the conflicting opinions I have been met with. I have listened to them, understood them, admitted them as far as they were admissible, but I have never allowed doubt to enter my heart." It's clear that Juliette's time at the convent left an indelible imprint on her and showed her at a young age the importance of having faith. Though heartbroken to leave the convent, when Juliette arrived in Paris, she would have been pleasantly surprised by her parents' recently acquired wealth. On top of a new luxurious apartment, her parents enjoyed many of the perks of the upper class, including a private suite at the theater. And part of this luxury was the ability to hire Juliette a group of tutors to continue her education. Almost immediately, her mother set to task providing Juliette with the education she needed to mature into a cultivated young woman. Juliette would have received an education typical for girls of her time, centered on the arts and humanities. She was taught how to sing gracefully, dance elegantly, and play both the piano and harp with proficiency. She was taught the art of arranging flowers and how to beautify spaces with perfumes and pleasant smells. She would have also received lessons in philosophy, history, and literature, the latter of which was always her favorite subject. Her mother strictly supervised all of her lessons, making sure that Juliette remained focused on her studies. And as much as Juliette's mother focused on Juliette's education and skills, she was equally devoted to enhancing Juliette's natural good looks. From an early age, Juliette's extraordinary beauty was apparent to all, surpassing even her mother's attractiveness. In fact, when Juliette was still a young adolescent, her mother took her to the royal palace to see King Louis XVI dine. The king, in an effort to soften the people of France's growing distaste for him, had opened his dining room to the public so that they could watch the royal family take their meals. Except on the day of Juliette's arrival, it was the royal family who was watching her. Queen Marie Antoinette, in particular, was so taken with Juliette's natural beauty that she sent one of her ladies-in-waiting to seek out Juliette and invite her to the queen's private apartments. As Juliette and her mother excitedly entered the queen's quarters, Marie Antoinette ushered Juliette over to examine her more closely. Though she uttered only a few words, it was clear from Marie Antoinette's widened eyes that the young Juliette left her in awe. How did Juliette feel to be singled out by Marie Antoinette, not only the Queen of France, but the Queen of Beauty? Did she feel like the most special girl in the whole country? That it was not just her parents that fawned over her, but that she had truly something remarkable about her? Did she begin to feel how her beauty could translate into power, if only she could harness it? Or was the shy and obedient Juliette embarrassed by the extra attention? Though we do not know how Juliette herself felt, her mother certainly took this event as encouragement to begin capitalizing on Juliette's astounding beauty. She taught Juliette at an early age how to enhance her looks with proper clothing and makeup. She would often instruct Juliette for hours at a time on how to apply her brush and powder at the toilette. As historian H. Noel Williams wrote, Madame Bernard, who was quite as proud of her child's beauty as she was of her own, attached the highest importance to dress. Consequently, every time she took her daughter to play or into society, occasions in which her maternal vanity multiplied, the poor child was obliged to pass long hours at the toilette. Juliette was also put on show whenever her parents had guests over to their apartment, especially when her mother hosted her salon. Presided over by a female host, salons were spaces for important men established in literature, politics, and the arts to gather and connect. Though Juliette was a reserved and quiet young girl, her mother always made sure that Juliette was present during these events. By attending her mother's salon from an early age, Juliette was not only taught the delicate skill of being a well-liked hostess, but she began to understand how hosting salons could wield power. By putting her at the center of Paris's cultural activity and giving her a network of influential men to call upon whenever she needed. Her mother's meticulous and relentless lessons in perfecting Juliette's appearance and manners were not for superficial means, but rather taught Juliette that her beauty and charm could make a significant impact on society if she learned how to manipulate it to her benefit. We'll continue our story after a brief word from our advertisers. Hey listeners, Grace Anna here, host of ArtMuse. I wanted to share another art-centered podcast with you called The Art of Crime, a podcast that delves into the unlikely collisions between true crime and the arts. Host Gavin Whitehead shares extensively researched episodes with gripping stories bringing art history and true crime together in a brilliant way. Learn about the attempted assassination of Benvenuto Cellini, the various artists who have been accused of being Jack the Ripper, or Madame Tussauds and her Chamber of Horrors, among many other fascinating topics. The Art of Crime podcast is currently in its 4th season, which focuses on art-related crimes in New York City. To learn more about the Art of Crime podcast, you can visit their website at www.artofcrimepodcast.com or find them on all streaming platforms where you can listen and subscribe. Welcome back, listeners. Now let's dive back in. With her unrivaled beauty, we can imagine that Juliette had a long line of suitors as soon as it was appropriate to consider marriage. But at the age of 15, she received a marriage offer from what might sound like an unlikely candidate, a middle-aged man nearly 3 times Juliette's age. Jacques Récamier was a wealthy banker who, like Juliette, was originally from Lyon. Though middle-aged, he was still considered very handsome, and his success as a banker had given him important international connections. Though good looks, money, and impressive social standing may have been enough for Juliette to overlook their massive age difference, the rationale behind their union is far stranger and was unusual even in Juliette's own time. Juliette had known Jacques Récamier since childhood. He had been a frequent guest to her parents' home in both Lyon and Paris, and always made a point of spoiling her with expensive dolls and gifts. And while Juliette would have known him as a guardian of such, there is a plethora of information to suggest that Monsieur Récamier may have actually been Juliette's biological father, something that he and Juliette's mother were aware of. Though scholars have not been able to prove that Monsieur Récamier was Juliette's biological father with total certainty, many do support this theory, as we know that Juliette's mother and Monsieur Récamier had engaged in a long-run extramarital affair. And as uncomfortable as this marriage arrangement may seem, it actually served a practical purpose. Monsieur Récamier proposed to Juliette at the height of the Reign of Terror. King Louis XVI had already been publicly beheaded, and Queen Antoinette would follow that October. Those connected to the monarchy were being executed on a daily basis, and Juliette's father and Monsieur Récamier were at risk of falling to the same ill fate. Not only was the possibility of her father being killed extremely terrifying for Juliette and her parents, but the Reign of Terror also made the prospect of Juliette marrying into the aristocracy extremely difficult, as most successful men were also being persecuted against. With no other viable options, and rightfully concerned for their future, Juliette would have to do what was best for her and her family. Marrying Monsieur Récamier would make Juliette his legal heir and ensure that she inherit his fortune, should he face the guillotine. For Juliette, it was a strategic move to secure her chances of survival, in case their worst fears were realized. For Monsieur Récamier, marriage was the best way that he could protect Juliette, his supposed secret daughter. And by guaranteeing Juliette's future, he would make Juliette's mother happy, who by all accounts he was still very much in love with. We do have to wonder, how did Juliette feel about marrying the man who was likely her biological father? And how aware was she that she might be his child? Did she know her mother's secret, or did she see Monsieur Récamier as a close family friend? It seems that Juliette agreed to the terms of the marriage without much resistance. In fact, her niece later shared that Juliette willingly consented to the arrangement. In such a dangerous time, Juliette must have understood that ensuring her survival was more important than marrying someone for love. And we know from surviving letters that Monsieur Récamier made clear from the start that his love for Juliette was like that of a father for a daughter, and that their union was by no means one of romance. In a letter to a friend, Monsieur Récamier explained, "I am not in love with her, but I feel for her a genuine and tender attachment, which convinces me that this interesting creature will be a partner who will ensure the happiness of my whole life. And, judging by my own desire to ensure her happiness, of which I can see she is absolutely convinced, I have no doubt that the benefit will be reciprocal. She possesses virtue and principle such as are seldom seen so highly developed at so early an age. She is tender-hearted, affectionate, charitable, and kind, beloved in her home circle and by all who know her." In the same letter, Monsieur Récamier later opened up about his feelings for Juliette's mother. "It may be said that my feelings for the daughter arise out of those I have had for her mother. But at present, having reached an age when all other pretensions are past, she only wishes to educate her child and make her a virtuous and good woman." Juliette married Monsieur Récamier on April 24, 1793. Juliette was only 15 years old, and Monsieur Récamier 42. Fortunately for all, Monsieur Récamier and Juliette's parents survived the reign of terror without persecution, which was nothing short of a miracle. In fact, Juliette's father was the only tax collector connected to the monarchy who was not beheaded in the Revolution. Though her marriage may have originated as a safety measure to ensure her survival in such turbulent times, Juliette and Monsieur Récamier remained married after the Revolution. Divorce was greatly looked down upon and would destroy their reputations, which was especially detrimental to the young Juliette, who was just preparing her entrance into society. Remaining married, Juliette and Monsieur Récamier were open about their marriage not being sexually consummated or romantic by nature, and there's no indication that their union was ever more than platonic. Juliette spent the next 4 years of her marriage in relative seclusion, as she waited for the political situation in Paris to settle. In the summer of 1796, Monsieur Récamier purchased them a chateau in Clichy, where Juliette lived with her mother. The chateau was both spacious and beautifully decorated, and was located right along the banks of the Seine River. It was here that Juliette began her career as hostess, inviting groups of friends to their home for dinner every Sunday. And though these gatherings were kept small and intimate, Juliette began to make a significant impression on her guests. For through the early years of her marriage, Juliette's elegance only grew, until she matured into a stunning young woman. With dark, bouncy curls, rosy cheeks, sparkling white teeth, and an angelic round face, Juliette's beauty was certainly one for the ages. As the famous fortune teller Madame Lenormand described of Juliette from this time, a figure supple and graceful, throat and shoulders of exquisite form and proportions, beautiful arms, though somewhat slender, a little rosy mouth, pearly teeth, black hair that curled naturally, a delicate nose, an incomparable brilliance of complexion, a frank face, rendered irresistibly lovely from its expression of goodness. Her step was like that of a goddess on clouds. And it wasn't just her looks that impressed those she met, but Juliette had the pleasant manners to match. She was often described as tender-hearted, charitable, good and virtuous, and went out of her way to be kind to friends and strangers alike. When the reign of terror ended in the summer of 1794, Juliette was able to make her first proper public appearances in Paris. As social gatherings and events picked back up, Juliette made a splash all over the city, causing whispers of both curiosity and awe everywhere she went. In fact, she even stole attention away from Napoleon during his victory speech when she stood on a chair to get a better view, inadvertently showcasing her outstanding beauty. As the crowd erupted in gasps and cheers, Napoleon was shocked to see that the noise was not in response to his speech, but rather to a young woman in the crowd. As historian H. Noel Williams wrote, "Thus, at the very onset of her career, Madame Récamier had the satisfaction of rivaling the conqueror of Europe himself in popular admiration." Rumors of Juliette's beauty rapidly began to spread across the city. As Juliette's niece later wrote, "Wherever she went, her beauty called forth a murmur of admiration, curiosity, and enthusiasm. At the theaters, in gardens, and subscription balls, at all these places Madame Récamier's presence was looked upon as an event. All these circumstances will serve to explain the quickness with which the beauty of Madame Récamier became not only famous, but popular. Not before long, Juliette became one of the most talked about women in all of Paris. And if her enchanting looks and kind-hearted demeanor weren't enough to turn her into a social sensation, her new home certainly would. In 1798, Monsieur Récamier purchased a hotel in Paris called the Hotel Necker, which he planned to convert into a luxurious townhouse for he and Juliette. Under Juliette's direction, the townhouse was redesigned and furnished in the popular neoclassical style. She hired leading architects to create furniture with top-of-the-line woodmanship. Her rooms were filled with mahogany chairs, tables, stools, and sofas, which were upholstered in bright blue wool, a color she chose herself. The result was nothing short of astonishing, and left visitors to her home in awe of both its innovativeness and beauty. Happy to show off, Juliette welcomed guests and excitedly offered tours of her public rooms, like the salon, dining room, and living room. It didn't take long for her home to become one of the most sought-after destinations in all of Paris, attracting locals and tourists alike. And female guests had the special privilege of viewing Juliette's private chambers. One woman fondly remembered Juliette taking her by the arm and whispering, "Would you like to see my bedroom?" Juliette must have known, as she led eager female guests into her private quarters, that they would be left speechless in its wake. Walking in, they would have been enveloped by the room's high, imposing ceilings, violet velvet curtains, and mahogany and bronze finishings. In the center of the room was Juliette's bed, which was raised upon a platform and flanked with large bronze swans, giving it a regal air. Behind was a large mirror, which forced each guest to literally imagine themselves in Juliette's bed, provoking feelings of lust, resentment, and excitement alike. As the writer Mary Berry, who visited Juliette during this time, wrote, "I went to the house of Madame Récamier. We were not resolved to leave Paris without seeing what is called the most elegant house, fitted up in the new style. All the chairs are mahogany and covered either with cloth or silk. Her bed is reckoned the most beautiful in Paris. It too is of mahogany, enriched with bronze and raised upon 2 steps of the same wood. Out of this bedroom is a beautiful little salle de bain. The walls are inlaid with satin wood and slight arabesque patterns. The bath itself presents as a sofa, covered with a cushion of scarlet cloth." Though unfortunately, no paintings survive of the home's interior, the original furniture pieces do, and they are today on view at the Louvre Museum, including Juliette's extraordinary bed. And while these tours left visitors in awe, they also served an alternate purpose. Juliette manipulated these visits and the inevitable gossip they stirred as a way to boost her public image within Paris's social circles and help launch her career as a leading society woman. With her impressive home causing a stir across the city, Juliette was ready to establish her own salon. In 1799, she began to host events on Monday evenings, open to writers, artists, politicians, and intellectuals. It comes with no surprise that her salon quickly attracted Paris's leading men and became one of the most popular gatherings in the city. Over the course of the next 6 years, her guests included generals, political activists, writers, intellectuals, and important artists. And as host, Juliette found herself at the epicenter of artistic, literary, and political activity. Her salon was especially popular amongst royalists, and those who disapproved of Napoleon's government appreciated Juliette's home as a safe space to discuss politics. But this did not stop Napoleon's own cabinet members and even his two brothers from attending. As Napoleon once complained, "Since when does my cabinet meet at Madame Récamier's?" Clearly, Juliette's salon was so enticing, it was worth facing Napoleon's wrath to attend. But soon, Napoleon's brother Lucien would do more than just sneak off to Juliette's salon. He would become completely consumed with desire for her. Juliette first met Lucien Bonaparte, Napoleon's younger brother, at a dinner party in early 1799. He had never before seen such a stunning young woman, and as soon as he laid eyes on her, Lucien fell desperately in love with Juliette. Not long after their first meeting, Lucien began to shower Juliette with love letters. In one surviving letter, he declared, "A few days ago, I knew you only by reputation. I had seen you sometimes at churches and fêtes. I knew you were the most beautiful of women. 1,000 tongues repeated your praises, but these praises and your charms had struck without dazzling me. Why has peace delivered me into your power? I was watching your way of walking, which is as simple and unaffected as your dress. At each of your movements, with each fold of your gown, it seemed as though flowers were opening." In another he wrote, "I have seen you again. Love seemed to smile upon me. Seated on a round bench, I spoke with you alone. I thought I heard a sigh escape from your bosom. The passion which masters me is expressed in my speech. Oh, Juliette, life without love is only one long slumber. The most beautiful of women ought to be compassionate, happy over the man who will become the friend of your heart." And Lucien could not keep his feelings to himself, but all of Paris quickly caught word of his infatuation with Juliette, and it became the talk of the town. How did Juliette feel to have the brother of Napoleon, the most powerful man in all of France, worship her like a goddess, fawn over her every breath, her every move? Was she flattered? Did his affections make her feel special? Or was she overwhelmed and suffocated by his unabating letters and relentless attention? Unfortunately for Lucien, the latter seems to be more true. In fact, Lucien sent Juliette so many love letters that she started to hand them back to him, always sure to compliment his writing, but advising him to not waste any more of his time on her. The letters became so persistent that Juliette even began to show them to her husband, pleading for his help. Luckily, after a few heated months, Lucien finally accepted that his feelings were not reciprocated, and in an effort to save his own dignity, slowly stopped sending Juliette love letters. But Lucien would not be the only Bonaparte to become infatuated with Juliette. In December of 1799, Lucien was appointed as Minister of the Interior and threw a massive gala to mark his promotion. Juliette attended the grand event with her husband, wearing a dazzling white satin gown and elegant pearl necklace to match. Soon after arriving, Juliette noticed a man staring at her. Though he was at a distance, she could feel the intensity in his eyes as he ogled over her. To her complete surprise, as she got closer to her admirer, she was shocked to realize it was Napoleon. Bashfully walking away, Juliette was soon after received by a messenger, who whispered in her ear, "The First Consul finds you charming." And Napoleon continued to pay Juliette special attention the rest of the evening. When dinner was served, he kept the seat next to him open and winked in her direction to invite her to sit down. Though Juliette politely declined, she felt his eyes on her throughout the entirety of the meal. After dinner, guests were invited into the salon for a musical performance. Instead of paying the musicians any mind, Napoleon watched Juliette the entire performance with increasing infatuation. When it ended, he made his way to her as soon as he could, took her by the shoulder, and remarked in a flirtatious tone, "You're very fond of music, madame." Juliette stood there, unsure of how to respond to the most powerful man in all of France's advances. Luckily, she was saved by Lucien, who, perhaps in a fit of jealousy that his brother was trying to seduce the woman he had spent the greater part of the year fawning over, broke up the conversation, and Juliette was able to slip away. How did Juliette feel to have Napoleon, the legend himself, fawn over her? That the man in the highest position in the country was showering her with attention. Did it make her feel powerful? Or did she wish she could just disappear? By all accounts, Juliette felt deeply uncomfortable by Napoleon's advances and in no way reciprocated his interest. She left the party with Monsieur Récamier as soon as she could, hoping that Napoleon would forget about their meeting. But there would be someone who would soon sweep Juliette off her feet, and she would experience, for the first time in her life, the magic of falling in love at first sight. And little did her male admirers know that the lucky recipient of Juliette's affection would actually be a woman. We'll continue our story after a brief word from our advertisers. Hey listeners, Grace Anna here, host of ArtMuse. I wanted to share another art-centered podcast with you called The Art of Crime, a podcast that delves into the unlikely collisions between true crime and the arts. Host Gavin Whitehead shares extensively researched episodes with gripping stories bringing art history and true crime together in a brilliant way. Learn about the attempted assassination of Benvenuto Cellini, the various artists who have been accused of being Jack the Ripper, or Madame Tussauds and her Chamber of Horrors, among many other fascinating topics. The Art of Crime podcast is currently in its 4th season, which focuses on art-related crimes in New York City. To learn more about the Art of Crime podcast, you can visit their website at www.artofcrimepodcast.com or find them on all streaming platforms where you can listen and subscribe. Welcome back, listeners. Now let's dive back in. Juliette met the renowned writer Madame Germaine de Staël in 1799. Germaine's father, Jacques Necker, owned the hotel that Monsieur Récamier purchased, and the two women met at the sale. By the time Juliette met Germaine, she was already a well-known author and respected as one of the most brilliant minds of the century. Her popular publications like Letters on Rousseau and revolutionary stance on women's rights had turned her into a celebrity character within Parisian society. Though Juliette knew of Germaine's work, she certainly did not know that she would be meeting her on the fateful afternoon that their paths first crossed. And more than this, that Germaine would send shivers of infatuation down her spine. We actually have Juliette's own description of this meeting in surviving pages of her memoir. As Juliette wrote, "One day, Monsieur Récamier arrived at Clichy with a lady whom he did not introduce by name. and whom he left alone with me in the salon, while he went to join some people who were in the park. This lady came about the sale of a house. Her costume was peculiar. She wore a morning gown and a little dress hat trimmed with flowers. I took her for a foreigner. I was struck by the beauty of her eyes and her expression. I couldn't account for what I felt, but I am sure that I was thinking more of finding out, or rather guessing, who she was than of addressing to her the usual commonplaces. Then she said to me with a lively and penetrating gaze that she was truly delighted to make my acquaintance. At these words, I recognized Madame de Staël. I did not hear the rest of the sentence. I blushed and was extremely embarrassed. I had just been reading Letters on Rousseau, of which I was extremely interested. My looks were more expressive than my words. She both awed and attracted me. I was conscious at once of her genuineness and her superiority. She, on her side, fixed her splendid eyes upon me, but with a friendly scrutiny, and paid me some compliments on my appearance that would have been too exaggerated and direct had they not seemed to escape her unconsciously, thus giving to her praises an irresistible fascination. My embarrassment did me no harm. She understood it, and expressed the hope of seeing a great deal of me on her return to Paris, for she was on the point of starting to Coppet. This meeting was only a passing one, but it left a deep impression upon me. I only thought of Madame de Staël, so much did I feel the influence of that strong and earnest personality. Juliette's account of meeting Germain is so full of passion that it sounds like the experience of falling in love at first sight. Despite the fact that she was only 21 and Germain 33, and that both women were married, Juliette is clearly overcome with desire. She admits to feeling both awe and attraction, and indicates that Germain returned this interest with compliments too forward to feel platonic. While she shriveled away in disgust from Napoleon and Lucien Bonaparte, here Juliette seems ignited with excitement. As we will see in part 2 of this episode, Juliette and Germain would soon grow extremely close and develop a strong emotional bond that would last until Germain's death in 1817. Though it has never been confirmed with certainty, their surviving correspondence strongly indicates mutual romantic feelings towards one another. In the words of scholar Aurora Wolfgang, these women were opposite in character and ambition, in almost all respects, and yet they remained passionately devoted to one another for 2 decades. And while Juliette secretly harbored feelings for another woman, she brilliantly manipulated her dress and look to maintain an air of innocence in the public's eye. Juliette intentionally always dressed in white, which not only gave her a signature look, but exuded an impression of purity and virginity that Juliette used to her advantage. As author Anne Egonnet wrote, Juliette turned virginity into a spectacular style. White signals virginity. Touch white and you leave a mark. Juliette trademarked absolute whiteness. She appeared in radiant white every day, morning, afternoon, and evening. White cotton in public for day, white satin for formal wear and evening. She chose white accessories whenever possible. White gloves, white slippers, pearls. White clothing was her artistic medium, her media brand. It was a brilliantly successful tactic. The color white also evokes classicism and plays off of the goddesses of antiquity. Like an actress preparing for a performance, Juliette carefully crafted her own image through intentional costuming and used it as a means to control her reputation in the public. Her look was both staged and scripted, manipulated to achieve her own means. As a woman in the late 18th century, Juliette was limited in the ways in which she could take charge of her own life. And so, she used her clothing as a tool of empowerment and to take agency over her own image in the public sphere. And by playing up her innocence through her well-planned clothing, Juliette was able to cover up some of her more scandalous behavior, like falling in love with another woman. And there are no better examples of Juliette's mastery over her own image than the portraits she commissioned during this time. Just as she crafted her public appearances, Juliette understood that she could use portrait commissions to self-promote the image of herself that she wanted society to see her as. Between the years of 1798 and 1805, Juliette commissioned over 7 different portraits of herself, with the hope that these images would circulate across Paris and Europe at large. Today, we will only have the time to explore a few of these marvelous portraits, but we have included images of all of her portraits on the ArtMuse website. In one portrait, painted by the female painter Eulalie Morin in 1798, we see Juliette garbed in a white Grecian robe, which slips off her shoulder to expose her bare skin. Her hair is wrapped elegantly in white fabric, styled up to show off her perfectly heart-shaped face. She rests her hand upon her chin, while she looks up at us quizzically and flashes us an inviting smile. It is almost as if we have caught Juliette in the midst of conjuring up her next master plan. Her pose reminds us that she is the mastermind behind her own look, and that she has carefully crafted the image that lays before our eyes. In a different portrait, painted in 1801 by Richard Cosway, we see Juliette again garbed in white Grecian robes. Here her dress also falls gracefully off her shoulder, but this time it reveals the upper part of her supple breast. On her head is a white transparent veil, which seductively covers part of her face, as well as her dark curly hair. Like a curtain opening onto a stage, Juliette playfully toys with her veil to reveal her own act, once again reminding us of the portrait's performative nature. Here we also see Juliette's remarkable ability to be both seductive and chaste, tempting and untouchable, and sexual and virginal at once. Cosway's portrait of Juliette was extremely popular with the public and widely reproduced across Europe, turning Juliette into a European sensation. But by far, her most famous portraits were to come. In 1800, Juliette commissioned the top portraitist of her day, Jacques-Louis David, to capture her likeness on canvas. The fact that David accepted the commission is a true testament to both Juliette's popularity as well as her husband's significant wealth. As the author H. Noel Williams wrote, "And so it came to pass in the spring of 1800 that the most famous of First Empire artists began painting the portrait of the most ravishing woman of all time." The only problem was, a few months after he began, David abandoned the painting for reasons that are not completely known, leaving the portrait incomplete. Scholars have speculated why David might have given up on the project. Some argue that he simply lost interest, others that the portrait was taking David too much time, or that he was unhappy with its progress. Some have alternatively proposed that Juliette may have been dissatisfied with her appearance and disapproved of the work. But the most interesting theory is that David may have struggled to paint a woman who had taken ownership over her own image. As Anne Egonnet wrote, "Some scholars have argued he felt too much psychological challenge to be able to finish the portrait. Here he was, confronted by a woman who had fashioned her own self and her own fame." Perhaps Juliette despite her air of innocence, was too strong a force for David to capture on canvas. Regardless of being unfinished, David's portrait of Juliette is nothing short of remarkable. Here we find Juliette reclining across a golden chaise lounge, her head turned towards the viewer to meet our stare directly. The painting setting is extremely austere, with just a footstool and oil lamp to Juliette's sides, and she feels as if she is being enveloped by the painting's dark space. The simplicity of her surroundings is echoed by Juliette's unusually bare look. Garbed in a plain white dress and without jewelry or shoes, it feels as if we have caught Juliette in the privacy of her own room. But her decision to dress down was actually an intentional and radical choice. It was almost unheard of for a woman of the upper class to dress with such austerity for her portrait, especially given that Juliette was being depicted by the most prestigious portraitist of her day. As Anne Egonay wrote, "For a large-scale formal oil-on-canvas portrait, Juliette dared to wear nothing but an absolutely simple white dress. Her style concentrates on the essential. It eliminates color, pattern, adornment, ornament, volume, and detail. And the simplicity of both her surroundings and dress make the power of Juliette's stare all the more effective. As Juliette looks over her shoulder at us, her eyes burn with such intensity that it feels as if she could see right through to our souls. Her elusive expression gives her an almost ethereal presence, which is enhanced by her white billowing gown. As if a ghost from a haunted past, Juliette confronts the viewer with her unabating gaze." As Anne Egonay continued, "Here Juliette is staring down the most eminent artist of her day, a man backed by Napoleon's military and political power, alone in a big dark room." Even in its unfinished state, Juliette's portrait is now appreciated as one of the most iconic works to come out of France's post-revolution era, and one of David's finest masterpieces. Since the Louvre's purchase of the painting in 1829, it has become one of the most celebrated works in the museum's entire collection, which is no small feat considering it is in company with famed works like the Mona Lisa. In fact, many consider David's portrait of Juliette to be the most famous unfinished work of all time. When David dropped the project, Juliette turned to his star pupil, François Gérard, to complete the task. In 1802, Juliette commissioned Gérard to paint her portrait. The resulting painting is not only one of the greatest masterpieces of all time, but helped launch Gérard's career to eventually become the most sought-after portraitist of the entire Napoleonic period. In Gérard's portrait, we find Juliette seated upon a gray antique chair, leaning casually against its back in a seductive manner. She wears a similar white gown as in David's portrait, but here she also wraps her lower body flirtatiously in a fashionable golden shawl. The white of her dress is translucent, and one can just make out the curves and swells of her body underneath the fabric. As Anne Egonay described, for her portrait by Gérard, Juliette poured herself deliciously into a sugar-white dress and a caramel shawl. Their fabrics animate every turn her body takes. We want to roll into the cashmere around her hips, to ripple like muslin or cashmere from her hand and knee. Here Juliette's mastery over her own image is on full display, her uncanny ability to be both erotic and virginal at once, her subtle and brilliant manipulations of her costuming and posture that both tempt us and taunt us, and her mystifying smile that leaves us desperate for more. As in David's portrait, here Juliette poses from a distance, another strategic and intentional decision to maintain her ever-elusive persona. As Anne Egonnet continued, Juliette encouraged public whispers, rumors, and anticipation. To be admitted into her presence became a privilege, something to write about and remember. And here we see both the literal and figurative presentation of that. Proud of her masterpiece, Juliette rests her foot upon a wooden stool, as if she is putting herself on her own pedestal and waiting for us to worship her. And Juliette was certainly proud of Gerard's portrait, evident in the large number of engravings she had produced and distributed across Europe. It became so popular that it was even mentioned in an early fashion magazine, applauding Juliette's outfit and declaring her a fashion icon. Today, Juliette's portrait is considered to be Gerard's greatest artistic triumph of his entire oeuvre. While not nearly as famous as David's and Gerard's portraits, in 1803, the famed sculptor Joseph Chenard captured Juliette's likeness in marble. Here, Juliette looks down coquettishly as she holds a shawl against her chest. Though the fabric fully covers her breasts, Chenard has brilliantly carved the outline of her chest, leaving just enough to our imagination. As the Getty Museum's description reads, "The sheath both demurely conceals and reveals her breasts." Though set in stone, Chenard's depiction of Juliette is incredibly lifelike and naturalistic. As the Getty's description continues, the softly modeled limbs and the slight twists of her head and shoulders suggest a living presence. It feels as if the sculpture could at any moment come to life, that Juliette might look up to meet our gaze, bat her eyes at us, and continue to tease us with her shawl. Chenard's description of Juliette is widely praised as the portrait that most successfully captures Juliette's spirit. Like her other portraits, Chenard's bust was reproduced, and today several copies survive at institutions across the globe. Juliette's fame in Paris skyrocketed after the success of her many portraits, but she would put her international fame to the test when in the spring of 1802 she traveled to England with her mother. It was clear upon her arrival that Juliette's reputation as a leading beauty of Paris had preceded her, and she was given a warm welcome in London. Soon after settling, Juliette was invited by the Duchess to her private box at the Covent Garden Opera, where she was introduced to the Prince of Wales. But as soon as she sat down, the entire theater broke out in a low murmur of admiration, clearly paying more attention to Juliette than to the stage. To avoid a scene, Juliette was advised to leave the theater before the opera finished. But as soon as she rose from her seat, everyone in the theater rushed towards the exit in hopes of catching a better glimpse of her. By the time Juliette left the theater, the crowd was so massive that she was nearly swept off her feet. And the excitement at Covent Garden was only the beginning. Whereas in Paris, Juliette was more selective about her public appearances, carefully planning her outings to maintain a sense of mystery to the public. In England, Juliette was constantly on show. Wherever she went, swarming crowds followed, and they cheered her every move with oohs and ahs of admiration. To English eyes, Juliette's style and clothing looked both foreign and innovative, and they had never seen anyone dress quite like her. They also would have recognized her from the copies of her portraits that had made their way into the shop windows of London. As a first-hand account of her visit described, Madame Récamier was not the most beautiful woman in Paris, but the most fashionable woman. Her bizarre coiffure, her rare and almost mysterious appearance at the theater and in public places had given her a celebrity no other woman of her era had. All the English newspapers announced her arrival, and people came from the three kingdoms to see the fashionable beauty. In the streets, at the theater, on the promenades, crowds thronged around Madame Récamier. Women of the highest rank, the most eminent men of England, had themselves introduced to her. She was at almost all the soirées. Her portrait sold everywhere. Upon her return to Paris, Juliette's fame only continued to grow, as did the popularity of her salon. Within the first few years of the 1800s, Juliette was largely considered to be the reigning queen of Parisian high society. This was helped by the fact that her husband's banking business became more successful with each year, and Monsieur Récamier soon became one of the wealthiest men in all of France. Through these years, Juliette entertained the most prestigious people of Paris, in both their townhouse as well as their country home in Clichy. And it wasn't just her outstanding beauty and unique style that left an impression on all of those around her, but also her particularly kind nature. As a man named Mr. Trotter, who was lucky enough to be one of Juliette's guests, wrote in his memoir, "The lovely phantom, breathing 1,000 delicious charms, yet flits before me, and so ingenuous and unaffected, shunning the ardent gaze, and if conscious of her dazzling beauty, unassuming and devoid of pride. Rich at the first of female virtues, a kind and noble heart, Juliette must have felt on top of the world, with all of Paris's most distinguished and powerful men in her corner. But as the age-old saying goes, all good things must come to an end." Though Juliette was able to control her image in the public eye, she could not control the political situation arising around her. As Napoleon was crowned emperor and became more and more despotic, she and her loved ones would one by one face persecution, and worse, exile. Even in Juliette's brightest days, darkness loomed on France's horizon, and her fall was both inevitable and unavoidable. I hope you have enjoyed part 1 of our 2-part episode on Madame Juliette Récamier. We will finish Juliette's story and honor her immense legacy in part 2 of this episode. I have included images, resources, and suggestions for further reading on the ArtMuse website and Instagram. ArtMuse is produced by Kula Production Company. Today's episode was written by me, your host, Grace Anna. Stay tuned as I continue to share the stories of the women behind some of the world's most important works of art. Until next time, bye for now.